The fluorescent lights of the disciplinary hearing room hummed, casting a sterile, unforgiving glow on Detective John Johnson. Once a figure of authority, his uniform now seemed to hang loose on his slumping frame, the crispness gone, replaced by the weight of public scrutiny and personal ruin. His eyes, once sharp and commanding, were dull, haunted, flitting between the stern faces of the panel and the large monitor displaying evidence against him. Detective Johnson, the lead investigator, a woman with an unflappable demeanor, began, her voice devoid of emotion. The charges against you include racial discrimination, abuse of power, and conduct unbecoming an officer. We will now present Exhibit A. The screen flickered, and a grainy video feed from a diner's security camera filled the space. Johnson watched, a knot forming in his stomach, as a younger, arrogant version of himself appeared. He saw the condescending smirk, heard the thinly veiled insults, the aggressive questioning directed at a calm, dignified black man quietly eating his breakfast. He saw himself, fueled by a misplaced sense of superiority, publicly humiliating this man, ordering him out of the diner with a dismissive wave. A collective gasp from the observers punctuated the silence as the video concluded. Johnson's gaze drifted to the corner of the screen, where the silhouette of the man he had wronged briefly appeared, a silent, powerful reminder. A chilling realization began to dawn on him: this wasn't just an isolated incident, a string of bad luck. This was meticulously orchestrated. This was a consequence, delivered with precision and patience. How had it come to this? How had a simple act of perceived dominance led to such an absolute downfall? His world had imploded, and he couldn't grasp the architect of his ruin. The image of the man in the diner lingered, an enigma. A title card appeared, stark white against black. 6 months earlier. Crestwood was a city in flux, actively shedding its industrial past for a gleaming, technology-driven future. The local news frequently lauded its renaissance, citing new urban developments, a vibrant arts scene, and steadily improving public services. Rarely acknowledged in these optimistic reports, however, was the quiet, persistent force behind much of this transformation: Marcus Thornton. A titan in the tech industry, Marcus wielded his immense wealth and influence with a deliberate, almost radical, humility. He eschewed flashy displays of power, preferring the anonymity of a good book in a quiet cafe to the ostentation of a red carpet. His power lay not in loud proclamations, but in the precise, strategic deployment of his resources. The Thornton Charitable Foundation, his philanthropic arm, had been the silent savior of Crestwood's beleaguered General Hospital, funding a state-of-the-art pediatric ward and modernizing critical care units, all while Marcus remained conspicuously absent from the dedication plaques. His investments in the downtown tech incubator had created thousands of jobs, yet his name was deliberately omitted from press releases, a testament to his belief that true impact resonated beyond personal recognition. He understood that genuine influence operated unseen, like deep currents shaping the surface. In stark contrast stood Detective John Johnson, a 16-year veteran of the Crestwood Police Department. For Johnson, power was tangible, audible, and visible. It was in the crispness of his uniform, the weight of his badge, and the unwavering conviction in his own judgment. A man of formidable build, his presence alone was often enough to command attention, which he relished. He cultivated an image of unwavering authority, an uncompromising guardian of order, his order. This often manifested as an aggressive, almost territorial, enforcement of what he perceived as societal norms, particularly towards those he deemed out of place or challenging to his ingrained worldview. His colleagues, while often deferring to his experience and street smarts, occasionally exchanged uneasy glances when Johnson's, telling it like it is, veered into overtly prejudiced territory, particularly in his casual dismissal of certain demographics. A profound, personal strain had recently tightened Johnson's already rigid grip on his world. His young son, Billy, had been diagnosed with a rare and aggressive heart condition, demanding a prohibitively expensive surgery that had threatened to unravel the family's financial stability. Just as hope began to wane, an unexpected lifeline appeared: an anonymous donation, meticulously routed through a series of charitable organizations, covered the entire cost of the life-saving procedure. Johnson, overwhelmed by relief, accepted the windfall without truly questioning its source. He rationalized it as divine intervention, a just reward for his years of thankless service, rather than the calculated benevolence of an unseen benefactor. His son's recovery, though marked by a faint surgical scar, had eased the immediate terror, yet the memory of his helplessness lingered, a raw nerve that made Johnson even more prone to asserting control wherever he could. It was a simmering resentment, a fragile confidence that required constant external validation, ready to erupt at the slightest perceived challenge to his brittle authority. The rich scent of coffee and sizzling bacon was the morning's comfort in the cozy diner, a place where the worn red vinyl booths had absorbed decades of local stories. Marcus Thornton, unassuming in a dark polo and khakis, sat at the counter, methodically stirring his oatmeal. He was just another face in the morning rush, a quiet presence amidst the blue-collar workers, the early retirees, and the scattering of office drones. These moments of anonymity were a rare, cherished luxury, a brief pause from the immense pressures of his world. The sudden clang of the entrance bell shattered the diner's gentle hum. Detective John Johnson strode in, his Crestwood PD polo shirt stretched taut over his chest, his holstered weapon a blatant assertion of his authority. Two younger officers trailed him, their boisterous laughter echoing too loudly. Johnson's eyes, perpetually scanning for deviations from his perceived order, snagged on Marcus. He saw a black man, clearly affluent, yet deliberately dressed down. To Johnson, this wasn't blending in, it was an act, a deliberate attempt to be invisible that, paradoxically, made him conspicuous. Too clean, too calm, too out of place for this joint, Johnson's internal monologue seethed, instantly classifying Marcus as an anomaly that needed to be addressed. His deep-seated biases, honed by years of unchecked power and a self-righteous conviction, clicked into place. Johnson nudged one of his younger colleagues and muttered something under his breath, a dismissive flick of his chin towards Marcus. Then, with a swagger born of unchecked authority, he approached the counter. "Everything all right here?" he boomed, his voice cutting through the diner's gentle hum, not to the waitress, but directly to Marcus. It wasn't a question, but an opening salvo. Marcus slowly lowered his spoon, his gaze meeting Johnson's. There was no defiance, no fear, just a cool, unwavering observation. "Perfectly fine, officer," Marcus replied, his voice a low, even baritone, resonating with an unshakable inner calm. "Is that so?" Johnson leaned in, a condescending smile playing on his lips. "Because you look out of place, friend. We like to keep things tidy in Crestwood. Don't want any unsettling elements disrupting our local businesses, do we?" The word unsettling hung in the air, thick with unspoken, racialized implications. "I'm simply having breakfast," Marcus stated, his eyes narrowing almost imperceptibly, a subtle shift that Johnson, in his arrogance, entirely missed. "Right. And I'm just making sure you're properly documented. You got any ID on you, sir?" Johnson's tone was dripping with sarcasm, challenging Marcus to resist. "Just a routine check. You wouldn't want to cause any trouble, would you? We aim to please our patrons here." He gestured vaguely at the other diners, some of whom had now fallen silent, nervously watching the exchange, aware of the unspoken tension. Marcus reached into his wallet, slowly producing his driver's license. Johnson snatched it, barely glancing at the photo before scrutinizing the name. "Thornton, Marcus," he read aloud, drawing out the syllables with an exaggerated theatricality, "and what brings Mr. Thornton to our humble establishment this fine morning? Slumming it, are we?" His smirk widened, daring Marcus to break his composure, to show any sign of weakness or anger. "I enjoy the oatmeal here," Marcus replied, his voice still calm, but with an underlying steel that spoke of immense, controlled power. Johnson scoffed, handing back the license with an exaggerated flourish that made it clear he considered the interaction a charitable act on his part. "Look, Mr. Thornton, I think it's clear you're not exactly the cozy diner type. We've got folks who need these seats, good, honest working people. Why don't you finish up, pay your tab, and find a place that's more suited to your, shall we say, unique tastes?" He paused, letting the implied threat hang heavy in the air, a silent warning. "Or I could just call a patrol car and we can discuss loitering and disturbing the peace downtown. Your choice." A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the diner. Marcus slowly pushed his bowl away. He picked up the check, paid the astonished waitress, who avoided Johnson's gaze, and rose from his stool. He looked at Johnson one last time, a gaze that held a depth of understanding and a promise of reckoning that Johnson, in his arrogant blindness, completely failed to comprehend. Without another word, Marcus walked out of the cozy diner, leaving behind the triumphant, self-satisfied grin of Detective Johnson, who believed he had just put an uppity individual firmly in his place. Johnson turned back to his colleagues, winking. "See? That's how you keep order." Don't let them think they run the show. Marcus Thornton's chauffeur-driven electric sedan glided silently through the morning traffic, its tinted windows offering a discreet shield from the bustling city. Inside, the atmosphere was one of quiet efficiency. Marcus sat in the plush leather seat, not a single muscle in his face betraying the incident at the diner. The indignity, the casual racism, the brazen abuse of authority, none of it seemed to have ruffled his composure. He hadn't reacted with anger, only with a chillingly objective assessment. Johnson's arrogance was not merely personal, it was symptomatic of a deeper, systemic rot, a localized corruption of power that Marcus recognized all too well. Upon arriving at his discreet, top-floor office suite, a minimalist space overlooking the city, designed more for function than opulence, Marcus dismissed his assistant with a brief nod. He walked to a sleek, holographic display embedded in his desk. With a few precise gestures, a secure communication channel opened. His first call was to Eleanor Vance, his chief legal counsel and a woman whose intellect was as sharp as her meticulously tailored suits. Eleanor, Marcus's voice was calm, almost detached. I require your expertise on a matter concerning public ethics and police accountability in Crestwood. Eleanor, a veteran of high-stakes corporate law, listened intently. Marcus recounted the incident at the cozy diner with clinical detail, devoid of any emotional color. He didn't demand vengeance, he articulated a problem. This isn't about personal slight, Eleanor. It's about a demonstrated pattern of unchecked authority. A police department's integrity is paramount to a city's health, and when that integrity is compromised, it affects everyone. This officer, a Detective John Johnson, acted with complete impunity, confident that his actions would go unchallenged. That confidence, in itself, is the real issue. Eleanor's brow furrowed. Do you wish for a formal complaint? Litigation? No, Marcus stated unequivocally. That is a reactive measure. We need a proactive one. I want an independent, comprehensive audit of the Crestwood Police Department's internal affairs, specifically focusing on ethical conduct, racial bias complaints, and the efficacy of their oversight mechanisms. Let's start with a discreet, yet robust, request for a transparency and accountability review initiated by the Thornton Charitable Foundation, perhaps in conjunction with a university research initiative we've been considering. Frame it as a community outreach and improvement project. Eleanor understood. This wasn't a direct attack, but a strategic deployment of resources that would expose the underlying weaknesses without ever revealing Marcus's personal involvement. It was the activation of his hidden mechanism, a sophisticated, highly influential network of legal, financial, and academic power, all operating under the benevolent guise of philanthropy. Next, Marcus contacted David Kim, the shrewd and deeply ethical head of his charitable foundation. David, our initiative to foster greater community trust in law enforcement, it's time to accelerate it. I want you to commission a study. Focus on the impact of police-community relations on urban development. This study should include a deep dive into existing internal affairs processes, public complaint mechanisms, and officer training on cultural sensitivity. We need it thorough, impartial, and beyond reproach. David, knowing Marcus's subtle directives, immediately grasped the gravity. Consider it done, Marcus. We'll engage the best independent minds. Marcus ended the calls, his expression still unreadable. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't threatened, hadn't even hinted at the personal affront. He had simply identified a systemic vulnerability and initiated a quiet, inexorable process of scrutiny. Detective Johnson, basking in his morning's petty victory, had no idea that his arrogant act had just triggered a chain of events far beyond his comprehension, a silent, invisible war against the very foundation of his unearned authority. The hidden mechanism was now in motion, and its gears, though unseen, were turning with chilling precision. A few weeks later, a ripple, so faint it barely registered, began to spread through the Crestwood Police Department. It arrived not as a seismic shock, but as a subtle shift in the air, a new, almost imperceptible tension. A small team from the State Department of Internal Affairs, SIA, set up an innocuous-looking office on the third floor, a space previously used for records storage. Their cover story was boilerplate, a routine, department-wide efficiency review and an assessment of community outreach programs, funded in part by a new grant. To most of the rank and file, it was just another bureaucratic intrusion, another group of pencil pushers who would make some recommendations, write a report, and then vanish. Detective Johnson, seated at his perpetually cluttered desk, barely registered the news. He grumbled about more busy work and taxpayer money wasted on soft initiatives. He was too busy reveling in a recent promotion to senior detective, a move he attributed to his no-nonsense approach and his ability to handle tough situations. He saw the SIA team as irrelevant, their work utterly detached from the real policing he and his unit performed daily. He scoffed to his partner, Detective Miller, just another bunch of suits trying to justify their existence. They'll poke around, ask some dumb questions about diversity metrics, and then go back to their state offices. Nothing to see here. Yet, the suits from the SIA were anything but idle. Led by Agent Anya Sharma, a woman with a quiet intensity and an uncanny ability to observe, the team began their work with methodical precision. They didn't storm in with accusations, they burrowed. Their initial focus appeared benign, reviewing shift logs, analyzing crime statistics, and even conducting seemingly casual officer wellness surveys. But beneath this surface activity, a deeper, more targeted operation was underway. They installed new, discrete digital recording systems in patrol cars, ostensibly for training purposes. They began cross-referencing radio call logs with incident reports, looking for discrepancies, for patterns of delayed response, or for missing documentation. Subtly, their questions began to gravitate. Officer interviews, initially general, started to include queries about challenging public interactions and how officers handle difficult personalities within the department. Johnson, arrogant and oblivious, participated in one such interview, delivering a self-congratulatory monologue about his dedication and his firm but fair approach. He even recounted the cozy diner incident, framing it as a masterful de-escalation of a potentially volatile situation, a testament to his keen judgment in identifying suspicious individuals. Agent Sharma listened, her expression unreadable, occasionally nodding, making sparse notes. Johnson left the interview feeling validated, completely unaware that his every word was being meticulously logged, cross-referenced, and analyzed against other data points. Over the next few weeks, the shadows began to lengthen. Reports of minor, administrative errors started appearing on the captain's desk, all subtly linked to Johnson's unit. A missing form here, an improperly filed report there, a radio call that seemed to conclude a little too abruptly. These were small, easily dismissed infractions, but their increasing frequency and their uncanny focus on Johnson's sphere of influence began to create a faint, unsettling hum in the background of the department. Johnson, ever confident, dismissed these as nitpicking and typical bureaucratic nonsense, unaware that each seemingly isolated incident was a thread, being carefully pulled by an unseen hand, slowly unraveling the fabric of his carefully constructed impunity. The ground beneath him, though he couldn't feel it yet, was subtly beginning to shift. The seemingly benign efficiency review by the State Department of Internal Affairs, SIA, began to shed its harmless facade, slowly revealing its sharper, more incisive nature. Agent Sharma and her team were no longer just auditing, they were excavating. Their casual inquiries deepened, morphing into pointed interrogations of junior officers about specific incidents, veiled questions about workplace culture, and persistent demands for access to archived complaint files that, coincidentally, often seemed to be missing or incomplete when pertaining to certain high-profile officers. Johnson, however, remained largely in denial. He attributed the growing intensity of the SIA's presence to typical bureaucratic overreach. "They're just trying to justify their salaries," he'd grumble to Miller, swirling a lukewarm coffee in his styrofoam cup. "Standard state government meddling. Just keep your head down, do your job, and they'll get bored eventually." Yet, a flicker of unease began to gnaw at him. He noticed the SIA team's eyes lingering on him a little too long in the hallways, their whispers seeming to cease whenever he approached. A few junior officers, usually eager for his approval, now seemed distant, avoiding eye contact. Then came the first direct hit. A formal request landed on his desk, demanding his presence at an SIA interview to clarify discrepancies in a report from a minor arrest made 6 months prior. It was the same period as the diner incident. Johnson scoffed internally. A petty shoplifting case from the city's less affluent district, where he had been particularly heavy-handed with a suspect, a young man of color, whom he believed was disrespectful. He'd seen it as a minor incident, quickly dismissed and forgotten. During the interview, Agent Sharma, her face as impassive as stone, produced grainy bodycam footage Johnson hadn't realized existed, or had assumed would be buried. It showed him verbally berating the suspect, making thinly veiled threats, and using excessive force during the handcuffing process. It wasn't just the arrest itself, but Johnson's accompanying language, condescending, dismissive, laced with microaggressions that painted a clear picture of his racial bias. "Detective Johnson," Sharma's voice was low, "can you explain why you felt it necessary to call Mr. Jenkins a thug repeatedly, even after he had complied?" Johnson blustered. He was resisting. He had a bad attitude. "I was maintaining order." He felt a bead of sweat trickle down his temple. The incident had felt so insignificant at the time, yet here it was, dredged up, dissected under a harsh, clinical light. The discovery of the Cozy Diner incident was less about a single piece of evidence and more about a mosaic. The SIA team compiled witness statements from other patrons, all corroborating Marcus's calm demeanor and Johnson's aggressive, racially charged bullying. They even found a brief, distorted snippet from the diner's security camera, a low-quality but damning visual confirmation of Johnson's public humiliation of Marcus. Johnson, secure in his belief that nobody would care about some guy being told off, had never bothered to check or delete the footage. He'd simply dismissed the encounter as a trivial exercise of his power. As the weeks bled into months, the investigation expanded its scope further back. Sharma's team unearthed a pattern of complaints against Johnson over the years, complaints from minority communities, from individuals he had intimidated, from those he had racially profiled. These had invariably been reviewed and dismissed by his direct superiors, usually with a terse memo citing lack of sufficient evidence or officer acted within departmental guidelines. The SIA began to build a picture not just of an errant officer, but of a department that had, actively or passively, enabled his behavior. Johnson started to feel the walls closing in. The confidence that had once radiated from him began to crack. He found himself increasingly isolated. His colleagues, sensing the shift in the departmental winds, distanced themselves. Even Detective Miller, his usual confidant, offered only terse, non-committal answers when Johnson ranted about the witch hunt. Johnson's dismissive attitude morphed into a simmering resentment, then into a panicked defensiveness. He saw himself as the victim of political correctness gone mad, a good cop being persecuted for being tough on crime. He remained stubbornly blind to the true nature of the gathering storm, unable to comprehend that the meticulous, relentless scrutiny was not random, but the carefully orchestrated consequence of a single, arrogant act. The investigation, initially a faint hum in the background, had now escalated into a full-blown roar within the Crestwood Police Department. Agent Sharma and her SIA team were no longer just scrutinizing Detective Johnson, their inquiries had spiraled outward, tracing the threads of his impunity directly back to his chain of command. Captain Roger Davis, Johnson's immediate superior and a man who had weathered decades of departmental politics, found himself increasingly entangled. Davis, a portly man with a perpetually furrowed brow, had always subscribed to the boys' club mentality, where internal issues were handled in-house and presented a united front to the public. He had managed Johnson for years, dismissing complaints as overreactions or unsubstantiated claims, fearing that any official black mark against a seemingly productive officer would reflect poorly on his own leadership. Now, those dismissed complaints were resurfacing, not as isolated incidents, but as a damning pattern. The SIA team, with their state-level authority, bypassed the usual local gatekeepers. They demanded access to internal review documents, disciplinary records, and even past performance evaluations that Captain Davis had conveniently marked as satisfactory despite glaring red flags. Sharma's team unearthed emails between Davis and other senior officers, subtly hinting at managing public perception or diffusing potential PR issues rather than addressing actual misconduct. Captain Davis, initially dismissive, grew visibly panicked. He tried to stonewall, citing departmental confidentiality and ongoing operational security, but the SIA's leverage was undeniable. They had the backing of a higher, more impartial authority, an authority that seemed surprisingly well-informed and unyielding. Calls from the mayor's office, usually a powerful influence, were met with polite but firm rebuffs from state officials, indicating that this investigation was far beyond local interference. "This is ridiculous, Anya," Captain Davis fumed during a tense meeting with Agent Sharma, gesturing wildly at a stack of resurrected complaint files. "These are old, closed cases. Johnson's a good cop, a little rough around the edges, maybe, but he gets results. You're wasting state resources chasing ghosts." "These aren't ghosts, Captain," Sharma replied, her voice cool and level, "these are systemic failures. And Detective Johnson's results appear to have come at the expense of public trust and legal ethics. The issue isn't just his actions, but why they were consistently ignored, or worse, covered up, by his superiors. Her gaze was unwavering, a silent accusation. The pressure mounted. News of the unusually intense state investigation began to leak. A local investigative journalist, Sarah Chen, known for her tenacity and deep community ties, picked up on the whispers. She started her own inquiries, ostensibly into police accountability and transparency, a narrative carefully, though subtly, encouraged by Marcus Thornton's foundation, which had initiated a public discourse campaign around these very themes. Chen wasn't just looking at Johnson, she was looking at the structures that enabled him, the complacency, the implicit biases of those in power. She began uncovering stories from within the minority communities of Crestwood, stories of ignored complaints, of officers acting with impunity, and of a departmental culture that protected its own above all else. The local power structure began to fray. Council members, once quick to praise the police department, now grew wary. The mayor, facing an upcoming election, quietly distanced himself from Captain Davis, sensing a coming storm. The higher system Marcus had activated was not just scrutinizing Johnson, it was dismantling the local ecosystem of complicity that had allowed him to thrive. Captain Davis, watching his career and reputation crumble, felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. He realized too late that Johnson's arrogant swagger, which he had tolerated for so long, was now dragging them all down. He had been so focused on protecting his department's image, he hadn't seen the invisible hand meticulously tightening the noose around them all. As the State Department of Internal Affairs, SIA, investigation gained unstoppable momentum, Detective Johnson's world contracted into a suffocating vortex of panic and paranoia. His usual bluster evaporated, replaced by a twitchy defensiveness. He saw hostile glances in every hallway, heard his name whispered in hushed tones, and felt the palpable shift in loyalty from his remaining colleagues. He was formally suspended, his badge and weapon confiscated, pending the outcome of the ever-widening inquiry. Confined to his home, Johnson endlessly replayed the past, searching for the moment he had truly gone wrong, convinced it was all a gross misunderstanding, a targeted attack. Meanwhile, Agent Sharma's team, having methodically documented Johnson's abuses and the systemic cover-ups, began to connect a new, unexpected dot. During the financial audit of the department's less transparent accounts, funds often used for community outreach or special projects, a series of large, anonymous donations had been flagged. These funds had been directed towards a specific, high-profile medical charity, ultimately linked to the cutting-edge heart surgery unit at Crestwood General Hospital. It was a unit that had recently performed a life-saving operation on a child with a rare heart condition. Concurrently, Sarah Chen, the investigative journalist, delving deeper into the interwoven networks of local power and philanthropy, made her own startling discovery. Her sources at the hospital, now feeling emboldened by the SIA's presence, cautiously revealed details about the anonymous donation that had saved Billy Johnson's life. The funds, they confirmed, had been routed through the Thornton Charitable Foundation, meticulously anonymized to protect the donor's identity. Chen's jaw clenched. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying, elegant precision. The same foundation that was subtly driving the public discourse on police accountability, the same foundation whose founder, Marcus Thornton, had been at the center of the diner incident, was also the silent benefactor who had saved the very officer's son. The weight of this revelation was immense. Chen sat on the information for a day, grappling with the ethical implications and the sheer, brutal irony of it all. This wasn't just a story about police corruption, it was a profound, almost biblical tale of consequence and an invisible hand of justice. She decided to hold the specific detail of the donor's identity until the appropriate moment, understanding its explosive potential. However, the SIA, through their own meticulous tracing of the financial paper trail, uncovered the same connection. A classified report, detailing the anonymous donation to Billy Johnson's surgery and its ultimate origin from the Thornton Charitable Foundation, landed on Agent Sharma's desk. Her eyes, usually so impassive, widened almost imperceptibly as she read it. The true depth of Marcus Thornton's hidden mechanism became terrifyingly clear. He hadn't just activated a system, he had orchestrated a perfect, karmic trap. The news, still heavily guarded, began to filter down through hushed whispers in the legal teams involved. Johnson's defense attorney, a weary public defender assigned to his case, received an anonymous tip, a carefully leaked snippet of the SIA's findings. He arranged an urgent, tearful meeting with Johnson. John, the attorney said, his voice grave, "there's something you need to understand. That anonymous donation that paid for Billy's surgery, we think we know who was behind it." Johnson, his face pale, shook his head dismissively. "What does that matter now? They're trying to ruin me for some petty stuff." "It matters because of who," the attorney pressed, leaning forward. "The funds came from the Thornton Charitable Foundation. The same foundation whose chairman, Marcus Thornton, was the man you ran out of, the Cozy Diner. The words hit Johnson like a physical blow. The air rushed out of his lungs. His mind, so long locked in denial and self-pity, reeled. The face of the calm, dignified black man from the diner flashed before his eyes, followed by the image of his son, pale and frail in a hospital bed. The very man he had so casually, so arrogantly humiliated, the man he believed was out of place, was the same man who had reached into the depths of his own despair and pulled his family back from the brink. The realization was a crushing, agonizing wave. It wasn't just his job, his reputation, his freedom at stake anymore. It was everything. His entire world, built on a foundation of casual cruelty and unearned superiority, crumbled into dust around him. The irony was a bitter, suffocating truth. He wasn't just facing consequences, he was facing a justice orchestrated by the very men whose life he had unknowingly saved. The game was over, and he had been played with a chilling, masterful precision. The disciplinary hearing room was packed, the air thick with anticipation and the acrid smell of stale coffee. Detective John Johnson sat at the defense table, a hollowed-out shell of the man he once was. His uniform, no longer crisp, seemed to swallow him. His face was a mask of despair, his eyes darting nervously around the room, avoiding the piercing gaze of Agent Anya Sharma and the cold, assessing stares of the ethics panel. The cameras of local news outlets, perched strategically around the room, captured every detail of his public undoing. This was no longer a discreet internal review, it was a full-blown reckoning. "We will now present Exhibit A," the lead investigator, her voice calm but firm, announced. The large monitor flickered to life, filling the room with the familiar, grainy security footage from the Cozy Diner. Johnson watched in agonizing slow motion as his past self, arrogant and brimming with self-importance, verbally accosted Marcus Thornton. Every sneering remark, every condescending gesture, every implicit threat was replayed, amplified by the stark silence of the room. He saw the cold, disdainful glint in his own eyes, the smug satisfaction as Marcus calmly rose and departed. The panel members, their faces grim, exchanged glances. The collective gasp from the observers was louder this time, a visceral reaction to the brazen display of unchecked prejudice. Following the video, a parade of witnesses took the stand. There were the diner staff and patrons, their testimony corroborating Marcus's dignified composure and Johnson's unprovoked aggression. Then came the parade of marginalized citizens Johnson had previously abused, their long-suppressed complaints now given a public platform. A young black man recounted being aggressively profiled and threatened over a minor traffic infraction. A Latina shop owner tearfully described Johnson's repeated, demeaning inspections of her business, always accompanied by veiled accusations. Each testimony chipped away at Johnson's already shattered reputation, exposing a pattern of systemic racial bias and abuse of authority that stretched back years. Agent Sharma took the stand, her presentation meticulous and devastating. She presented the bodycam footage from the minor arrest Johnson had forgotten, showing his racially charged slurs and excessive force. She detailed the long list of prior complaints against him, all summarily dismissed by Captain Davis and his superiors, highlighting the systemic cover-up that had enabled his behavior. She laid bare the internal emails, the managed reports, the culture of silence. Detective Johnson's actions were not isolated incidents, Sharma concluded, her voice ringing with quiet authority, but the predictable outcome of an environment that not only tolerated, but actively protected, discriminatory conduct. Then, a hush fell over the room. The double doors at the back opened, and a figure entered. All heads turned. It was Marcus Thornton. Dressed in a dark, impeccably tailored suit, he moved with a quiet, commanding presence that drew every eye. He didn't stride, didn't posture, he simply existed, a force of calm gravity. He was called to the stand, not as an accuser, but as a witness. "Mr. Thornton," the investigator began, "can you describe the events of the morning of March 14th at the Cozy Diner?" Marcus's voice was clear, even, devoid of any discernible emotion. He recounted the incident with clinical detachment, detailing Johnson's unprovoked aggression, his use of coded language, and the public humiliation. He offered no embellishments, no emotional outbursts, just the facts. His testimony was devastating precisely because of its dispassionate delivery. It wasn't about revenge, it was about truth. As Marcus finished his account and prepared to step down, his eyes, calm and unwavering, briefly met Johnson's across the room. In that moment, Johnson saw not the uppity men he had dismissed, but the silent, powerful force that had dismantled his world. He saw the architect of his reckoning. And in Marcus's eyes, he saw a fleeting glimpse of something else, a deep, almost sorrowful understanding, an acknowledgement of the shared, tragic irony of their connection. The men he had scorned, the men whose face now stared back at him from countless newspaper headlines, was the same men who had saved his son. The weight of this revelation, amplified by the public scrutiny, crushed Johnson completely. His defiance evaporated, replaced by utter, desolate despair. His head slumped, his shoulders shook, and in that crowded, silent room, Detective John Johnson, once so full of self-righteous fury, finally broke. The verdict came swiftly, delivered with the stark, uncompromising finality of an avalanche. Detective John Johnson was not merely dismissed from the Crestwood Police Department, he was stripped of all pension benefits, his law enforcement certification permanently revoked, and faced criminal charges for abuse of power and assault stemming from several of the unearthed incidents. The media frenzy that followed was unprecedented, turning him into a national emblem of systemic racial bias and unchecked authority. His name, once synonymous with a tough, if controversial, brand of policing, was now a byword for disgrace. His family, particularly his wife and young son, found themselves ostracized, forced to contend with the public humiliation and the devastating financial fallout of his actions. Billy, though physically recovered from his surgery, now carried the heavy burden of his father's very public fall. But the retribution did not end with Johnson. Captain Roger Davis, along with several other senior officers who had actively suppressed complaints and fostered a culture of impunity, also faced severe consequences. Davis was immediately demoted and then forced into early retirement, his career ending in ignominy. Others were terminated, their own records marred, their complicity in Johnson's abuses exposed for all to see. The local police department, already reeling from the investigation, underwent a seismic shift in leadership and policy, now under intense state and public oversight. In the wake of the disciplinary hearing, Marcus Thornton, choosing his moments with strategic precision, stepped into a more visible role. He didn't grandstand or gloat. Instead, he utilized the platform his foundation had meticulously built. At a major press conference, alongside newly appointed, reform-minded city officials and Agent Sharma, Marcus announced a sweeping new initiative funded by the Thornton Charitable Foundation. This wasn't just about philanthropy, it was about systemic change. The incident involving Detective Johnson was a stark reminder that true justice requires constant vigilance and unwavering accountability, Marcus stated, his voice resonating with calm authority. Our foundation believes in supporting systems that uplift all members of the community. Today, we are announcing a multi-million-dollar investment in police reform initiatives for Crestwood. This includes funding for a new independent civilian oversight board with real power, mandatory bias training for all officers, comprehensive community policing programs, and a transparent, publicly accessible complaint system. He continued, "This is not about punishment, it is about building a more just and equitable future. It is about ensuring that every citizen feels safe, respected, and heard, and that no officer, regardless of rank, believes they are above the law." The reforms were meticulously designed, drawing on the very data and insights gathered by the SIA and the independent researchers Marcus had commissioned. It was a precise, surgical intervention, designed not merely to patch up a wound, but to heal the entire organism. In the final scenes, months later, Crestwood was slowly beginning its transformation. The police force, under new leadership, was visibly different, with officers engaging with the community in new, positive ways. Johnson, now a civilian, struggled to find work, facing the harsh reality of his choices. He would occasionally watch his son play, the scar on Billy's chest a constant, agonizing reminder of the men he had scorned and the profound debt he owed. He understood, with a chilling clarity, that the silent, dignified men he had once dismissed as out of place had not only saved his son's life but had also, through a masterfully orchestrated dance of justice, dismantled his own. Marcus Thornton, observing the nascent changes in the city from his office window, felt no triumph, only a quiet satisfaction. His intervention had not been an act of personal vengeance, but a precise, calculated effort to rebalance a system that had become corrupt. The ultimate catharsis for the audience came not from a violent showdown, but from the elegant, inexorable triumph of truth, accountability, and the power of an unseen hand to deliver a justice far more profound and enduring than any retribution. The moral resonated clearly: power, unchecked and misused, will always meet its match, often in the most unexpected and ironically poignant ways.